We're so happy to see all of you all here today. And today our topic is going to be talking about leading AAC in your neck of the woods. So whether that's in your school or your district, or some other setting. Yeah, so we wanted to kick us off with a conversation starter, which can either be you typing in the chat if you're more comfortable that way, or you can unmute and speak out. We just wanted to talk first about overall, what are your barriers to AAC training, but also what's going well in your school or district or your settings?
Says a barrier I'm hearing is that AAC is distracting from the lesson or the activity in the classroom. Okay.
Yeah, and what I hear from that is less of a barrier to teaching or leading or coaching, but more of a barrier that you hear when maybe you're teaching or leading or coaching. So that is really important. I also see teachers feel intimidated by AAC, especially devices. They're reluctant to try it. Students with different devices and systems in the same classroom, so the staff feels overwhelmed and intimidated. Yes. Shares, I'm not directly in the schools, but a barrier I hear a lot from assistive technology professionals is a lack of time for learning, especially for paras in the district. Yes, that was one I was going to say too.
Yeah.
See another one, barriers, buy-in from all the team members, but something going well, providing support to those who are willing to learn and interest in growing skills. Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Go with the goers, right? And then coming from a state agency perspective, thinking about how to support access to training for the various people who work with individuals who use AAC, like case resource managers, etc. Yes. Also having a hard time getting past they're not using their device, they're just playing, right? Or just stimming on it. We hear a lot of those reasons and excuses. There's one where I see difficulty helping staff understand how to respond and set boundaries other than taking the device away from the student. Absolutely. Just to validate all of these that I see in the chat too, these are so common. I've experienced personally almost every single of these barriers that I see in here. So I think maybe after we go through some initial ideas, we could just spend some time talking through these barriers and how we can try and move past them. We're just going to talk through, if you want to go to the next slide, Sari, our topic today obviously is empowering others, so leading trainings in your space. We're going to talk first about different types of topics that you might cover in the trainings, and then different types of trainings, because it doesn't just have to be traditional, what you may think of as like a sit and get type of training. You can train in other ways as well. And one of those ways is coaching. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we can open it up to just more of a discussion around what is going well for you and overcoming some of these barriers that you listed as well. So one of the first things that I think we all think about is, okay, I know that people need to know things about AAC, but what do I cover? What do I talk about? And so these are some of the things that I personally have found really helpful to train on when considering a training in a school setting. And these trainings would be specifically for someone like a teacher or a paraeducator, someone who is supporting the student as a communication partner, as an educator, supporting their use of an AAC device. So some things I might train on would be following the student's lead. Wait time is a really big one, especially I've noticed as communication partners get better at modeling and do more and more modeling. Sometimes they're modeling so much and thinking about that, which is great, but then they might forget to give that space and that time for wait. Asking open-ended questions as opposed to the opposite of that, which is really just that directive line of questioning, which sometimes we fall into the trap of for our AAC users, especially. And along that, making comments and using their device or a modeling device to make comments as well. Sabotage, that is something that is still talked about, but coming from a neurodiversity affirming lens, not sure that's something we would necessarily want to do all the time. I think you'd have to be really cautious in this. And what I mean by sabotage, I know when I went to grad school, we were taught to do things like, if we're doing an arts and craft project, maybe put the tools inside a jar or a box or something that's really hard to open. So then they would need to use their device to request help or to communicate in some way to get that help, or put something slightly out of reach, or put on a glue cap really tightly. So creating a situation that encourages communication. So again, just being mindful of what you're doing and how you're doing it with that one. teaching others to give choices, accepting all forms of communication, not telling someone to say it again with your device and things like that, turn taking and choice making.
I even feel like I have to start before this of just like how to turn it on, how to put it in guided access, how to like just, that feels like one of the very first barriers for people is they're just terrified of the thing itself. So making them feel more comfortable with the physical object is usually where I start.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. On the next slide, we're going to get into a little bit more AAC specific things, which does include that operational use of the AAC device, how to charge it, how to teach your student to charge it, but also you as the adult to remember and set up systems so that you're helping them initially charge it, turn it on. You'll see in some photos that I really am a huge proponent of doing training either in real time, which could look like coaching, or even like think aloud strategies to use with an educator who's working in real time with you with the student, but also just getting those devices, if you have them, if you have access to them, getting them in the hands of the people that you're training. So to your point, Molly, they can just start using them and touching them and hopefully removing some of that fear.
Yeah, added responding to, acknowledging all forms of communication, using words like I see, I wonder. And Lori, I think you're also kind of touching on the idea of validating what they say, right? Rather than, did they mean to say that? Or that wasn't the answer I was looking for, going with that student's lead.
Yeah, following the child's lead. I love that so much. But also what I love about your comment is you're not saying, you said help. Like if a child's reaching for something, you said help me. Well, no, they didn't say help me, but you could say something like, I wonder if you mean help me. So you're not necessarily attributing something that's not what they're actually trying to say. So I love that. In the chat, I like to begin by emphasizing is that communication can be fun and modeling is not only requesting. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. And Sarah and I were lucky enough to go to Closing the Gap, which is the big assistive technology conference a few weeks ago. And Dr. Karen Erickson was speaking and she was talking about modeling, which reminds me, Sarah, maybe you're going to talk about this here, but she said that she started calling it demonstrating. Is that right, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you're doing. It just made me think every time we say modeling now, I'm like, or demonstrating. Sometimes, like you're saying, that communication be fun, and it's not only requesting, sometimes it's about just the vocabulary that we use, right? So I love that point.
When I coach SLPs in our district, we have conversations about what is the difference between doing something like aided language stimulation or, modeling versus using a prompting hierarchy and teaching a specific word and going through and not just jumping straight to the modeling prompt, but, thinking about that wait time and gestural cueing and some other steps before actual modeling. So I love that distinction. What you'll see on this slide here, other topics to cover that are more AAC specific. Yes, modeling, demonstrating, aided language stimulation, talking about what are core versus fringe words and when and how you might use them, going through a prompting hierarchy, and then those operational AAC skills. And then we linked in here a link that takes you to Rachel Madel's website. And on there, she has a free AAC coaching bundle. And it has things like the screen grab that you can see here of this AAC skills checklist, and just has a lot of really helpful resources to guide your coaching or your training practice. Okay, so here are just a few of the different ways that you can train, specifically thinking from a school district perspective. And this was me as an assistive technology specialist within the school. Some different ways are formal sit and get training. So that's when you might gather a group of people together, maybe a whole school team, maybe different people, all the physical therapists and occupational therapists or whoever in a formal training, or a semi-formal hands-on training, which often is smaller groups I've found. So it might be like the photos that you see here are a group of paraeducators in 2 different buildings, and getting that hands-on time that we talked about, where you bring as many devices as you can and let the educators try them and play with them. And what you see in that top picture was a fun, engaging activity where they were going on a scavenger hunt using their AAC devices to talk to each other and just having to kind of figure it out on the fly, because that's how we figure out a lot of these devices. It's just by using them and trying them. And then finally coaching, that real time sitting next to someone and working with them side by side. And we just wanted to ask you all, how do you prefer to teach staff about AAC? Maybe if you are in a school setting, or even if you're not, what are different ways that you like to teach AAC? We heard someone say earlier using devices, but just wondering what else.
Hi, how are you? One of the teachers in our district ended up buying a bunch of games, and then we created a core word, or a game board, right? Game language board. So we actually had people playing things like Connect Four and Hi Ho Cheerio and Uno. And it was just all this kind of playful, funny. And then there's a couple of the, vocabulary words that are like, kind of like a little bit slangy, like, and people had such a good time playing those games, and they're just like, oh, I feel like I can incorporate more AAC use. It's not about like, oh, we're having to do this around snack time and it's stressful, but it was just like something super fun.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. Some of the highlights that I heard in that were make it engaging, even for the people we're training too. We want them to see AAC as fun and as a thing that can be embedded into any context beyond requesting at snack time, which I think a lot of educators have used AAC in that way in the past. So helping them move beyond just that.
Linda, what you said also makes me think about like removing cognitive load. Like we talk about that with our students, right? If they're learning a new switch skill, we're going to do an activity that's not heavy on language. Well, for us as adults too, right? Doing something like a game that maybe we're familiar with. And then while we're learning this new system too, that might be kind of helpful. I hadn't actually really thought about it like that. So thanks for sharing.
The other part that was fun about that is that then we would give them a game that didn't have like a board, and they would script like what could be possible things you could say about this. And the responses were so fun and unique that it's like I just felt like people connected in a way that they probably wouldn't have before.
Camille just noted natural learning in moments when possible. So not everything is scripted out, right? Because communication isn't like this. And then hands-on opportunities too. Thanks.
If you are considering doing a formal training, you could either do a building-based training, which would be, potentially the whole staff ideally, or maybe specific teachers within that building who are supporting a student or a group of students who use AAC. You could teach just in one classroom or just a group of paras. So there are lots of different ways to go ahead and do a formal training. And there's training templates available. We linked to here that are research-based and have so many different resources that are pooled together in these trainings. So one is Model as a Master Pal, which has a whole series of different modules. Each one is based around a teaching strategy. So for example, there's a whole module around wait time, and it just has different resources that have been pulled to talk about wait time. And a slide deck. So you'll find a slide deck, you'll find a teaching script, you'll find additional resources, some activities, just a very comprehensive source of materials that you can find. And I believe I pulled those from Practical AAC website for those. And then the Project Core training modules. Project Core comes out of University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's all research-based, and it is specifically geared towards teaching AAC within the school setting. And so they have a series of, I think, 12 modules also. Each one is about 15 minutes, and I think you can get clock hours for it. Don't quote me on that though. I know that I set it up in my district so that if people took it as an asynchronous course, then they could get clock hours through the district for it.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Sarah, because you shared that once, and I think that was really helpful for people to know. setting up something that's already a made module to get Falkers in your district. So if you are interested in that, Sarah, you'd be okay with sharing kind of how you did that. You could email
Absolutely.
Sarah. We'll make sure we put her email in there.
One of the ideas behind this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, because there are templates and things that you can build off of and use out there, because we know time is an issue for us as well. So here are some of those kind of in line with what was shared a little bit ago of games and other semi-formal training ideas. So the AAC edition of Battleship is linked on there. That is from Practical AAC, and they used, I think that's is that a touch chat board maybe? 2 different core vocabulary boards, and they have instructions on there of how to play it as if you're playing Battleship against someone. So just a fun way to get to know where the words are on the boards that you're using. But really just thinking of bringing your colleagues together and communicating either only through AAC or primarily through AAC, or, you know, using AAC in some capacity, either having snacks or meals together, having a readathon, using a board game, a pizza party. One thing that I did recently was just put people in small groups and had them pull up their phone and just talk about a photo, because we all have a ton of photos on our phone, and just share about their photo using AAC, and then the other people at the table asked questions or made comments about their photo. So just, you know, figuring out, and I would give them little nuggets of helpful hints in there, like this is how you find search. This is where the typing feature is. You know, this device is categorically organized, so maybe look for categories or whatever it might be. But again, just the idea being to get people's hands on the devices.
I love that idea because people love sharing about their own things, right? Their own photos. Can you tell us about the readathon a little bit?
Yeah, this was an idea that came out of Practical AAC. So I'm not exactly sure. I haven't done this one myself, but I'm guessing maybe using AAC to support reading. I could see it being done in a shared reading capacity where maybe you're picking, you know, keywords out while you read it, or if you have maybe a simple book, using AAC to read the whole book. But I don't know. There's different ways you could do it. I haven't done that one myself. Here's some more. So maybe doing like a game night or a game day, maybe doing it after school, and perhaps including people beyond your educators, maybe bringing in some families. The key being having access to as many types of AAC devices as you can, whether that's low-tech boards or high-tech devices. And then here are some of those games, some of which were mentioned before: Go Fish, Battleship, Uno, Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, Guess Who, Trouble. And then having maybe some handouts that people can take home with them. So maybe if you're not specifically talking through, these are why we need to use AAC, these are AAC myths, but just having them there so people can take it and read it on their own time later on. And then consider inviting some people who use AAC and their families. And these ideas are all straight from Practical AAC. So if you click that link, it'll take you to the blog that talks all about this. So this, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but this is some research that shows that if you're doing a sit and get type of training where you're leading what can be called theory-only trainings, that really the impact on learners' knowledge, so in this case, other adults and educators you work with, is only about 10%. And the impact on their skills, what they learn, and is only about 5%. And what they actually change, 0%. It's just shocking to me. So that's when you're just standing up there and talking at people. When you're talking and also modeling, I think in this case, meaning like you are demonstrating to them the concept. So maybe, you know, showing them how you might use an AAC device, it goes up a little bit, 30% impact on knowledge, 20% skill, but also not a lot on the actual practice of the people who are attending. Theory, modeling, and practice. So where they're also practicing with devices or boards, it's increased especially their impact on their skill, but their actual practice, it only increased it about to 5%. But if you add into that coaching piece where you're talking through what they're doing, asking them questions so they can think critically about their own practice, then that impacts their actual practice the most. And this is just sharing the difference and the overlap between a training and a coaching, specifically as related to assistive technology and AAC. So you'll see that when you both train and coach, is a great improvement in student outcomes, and you can provide that support either in person or virtually, and it really does help improve AAC outcomes. So we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think just having that green section, that coaching section that's more reflective and getting someone to think about their own practice and why they do what they do and what minor adjustments and tweaks can they do to improve their practice is really where the learning takes place.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to do, right? We come back to that time piece. And I know Sarah and our colleague Amy Connolly in Bellingham did a literacy retreat that had coaching cycles in it. And I was impressed when you guys said that they would, the participants would have video taken of them doing some of the activities in class or with students in their therapy sessions, and then you'd reflect on the video. And that's so humbling for any of us to be able to take video. But I'm sure it was probably pretty great as a coaching tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do that some in my district as well, where we do 6-week coaching cycles where I meet with an SLP, or actually this time around, I'm meeting with 2 SLPs, and we're doing more of a small group coaching model. And we do a 30-minute planning session all together where we talk about the student and then maybe what it is that we want to focus on, what instructional strategy, for example, aided language stimulation or whatever it is, wait time. And then the SLP will record themselves, or we watch in real time. Usually, since I'm remote from my district, it'll be either through Teams or a recording. And then we do 30 minutes of reflection afterwards. And yeah, it's really humbling, especially when there's someone else that you're accountable to in addition to the coach. You really have to be able to not only reflect on your own practice, but be able to accept, some feedback from other people. But it's a great learning opportunity and learning for the people who are watching as well as the people who are doing it. And we just get so much great feedback from the educators saying that it's a more powerful experience for them than all of the, sit and get types of trainings that they've ever been to.
It's kind of interesting in this model because it's implying that you've done some training. The participants who you're coaching have training and they know about the strategies and the AAC systems. And then you're kind of going a step further.
Working on that, I know I'm talking to Sarah a bit too to see about what works in her district as well for the implementation. But so far it's been more so like meeting with teams and figuring out what supports they need and then how we can work on implementing that. So sometimes it's trainings after school or going in with them during different times of the day.
Let's see, Marissa said, I helped do a re-eval with a student who utilizes AAC, and the student's para was present throughout the eval. It was great because I got to provide feedback as the para modeled and encouraged use of the student's device. Made me want to be a TOSA, but for AAC, that would be so neat.
I love that. And one thing I love about that is if it's possible to, if a student has a one-on-one para or a para they primarily work with, and if it's possible to do your speech therapy when the para is there, then that doesn't necessarily need to, pull para time before or after school. You can do it in real time and be doing that coaching where you're really helping change their practice at the same time. So prerequisites to successful coaching, they have to know a little bit about AAC, and this can be something you do while you're coaching, but having that foundation in order to attach the new learning to is helpful. And then they also have to really have that intrinsic desire to learn and to grow. This is why I always say, go with the goers. So when we do coaching in our district, I have people opt into it. I don't work with my director and say who needs this? It's nothing like that. It's whoever opts into it. And then sometimes we have to triage and prioritize within that. But having that desire to learn and to change and to grow is really important. And sometimes it's intimidating to us since we were not explicitly taught, depending on what our role is in graduate school, to coach others. It's helpful to have a list of questions as you're getting started on this, and just really knowing that as the coach, just asking reflective questions that are open-ended and having the other person share out, their thought process really leads them to that critical thinking piece that will implement change ultimately. So here's just a list of questions. When I first started doing this, I would literally have the questions on the side of the notes that I was taking just to help myself as the coach think through like, what are examples of other questions that I can ask them? And then, as the person you're working with is speaking, just using what are called summative statements to summarize what you heard. So then that gives them an opportunity to say, no, I didn't really mean it like that. I should have said this, or yeah, that's exactly right. And then they hear again, what their line of thinking was repeated back to them. So here's some examples, like what I heard you say was, or would it be fair to say you're thinking, again, just leaving it open-ended, but allowing for the person to correct you in case you got it wrong.
You modeled that today, Sarah. When people were sharing, you said a highlight from what you said, I think was.
Yeah. And I like to do that in conversation now with people, because I find that I often get it wrong, and it gives the other person a chance to be like, no, like that's not what I meant. And just some advice from having done this before, having a relationship with the person is helpful. But as Sarah said, I did this in Bellingham with educators who I had zero relationship with, and it still works fine. But it is really relationship driven. So if you have people who already and you trust and they trust you, then that works even better. And just having it really be strengths based, being sure to offer some constructive feedback, but like maybe sandwiched within things that they are doing well, just so you're not just beating them down with corrective feedback, but also encouraging them and saying like, hey, that was great. Like last session, I counted that you modeled 10 times in 30 minutes. And this session, you modeled 30 times in 30 minutes, so just really giving them that feedback, but in a really strengths-based way. And then I like to also pick one technique that can be implemented at a time. That just keeps it more focused. So I often in a 6-week cycle might start with the first week being kind of baseline and, developing that relationship and partnership. But then, based on what comes from that first session, let's say if we're sticking with the modeling example, they only modeled 6 times in 30 minutes and it's a beginning AAC user, like, oh, we might want to work on that. So maybe, we're talking about that. And then the second session could be aligned with what it is that you discussed the first session. So then you're talking more about the modeling specifically, and then, seeing where that takes you for the next session, if you are doing it over time. But just starting small too. We don't have to change the world in one coaching session, even if what's the beauty of, or one of the pieces of this that I love so much is you're meeting the person where they're at. Whether they're a super advanced educator who's been using AAC with students for many, many years, then you meet them there and you're continuing to tweak. There's always something that we can do different and learn and improve and grow. Or if they're very new to this, then start where they're at and just start small and go from there.
This is Rose. I wonder if I could share. And I'm at the Developmental Disabilities Administration, and still I'm so far from ever being in a place to give training on AAC. I'm still trying to learn about it, but I'm trying to think also about how to support opportunities for learning by colleagues as well, because I have colleagues who I don't often get to work directly with individuals and families. I'm sort of back in an office a lot. But colleagues who do get to work with some of their clients use AAC or could use AAC. And today is just really bringing home how critical it will be to think about ways to get actual direct contact experiencing using AAC, because I've been reading a lot of the blog posts and scouring the websites and reading articles, and there's just such a difference between reading the theory of it, like you were showing, and then experiencing the direct communication with someone, and thinking about the timing of a communication exchange when you're connecting with someone who uses AAC. So this session is making me think about how to really think about opportunities to get direct experience for training.
And that comment also made me think of the I do, we do, you do, and that like maybe I do in the sense of, in this case, like you're researching all the theory, right? And then maybe if you need a bridge to, like for the people who are really hesitant to use AAC, maybe watching some videos too. So if you're not someone who feels comfortable using AAC, but you want to support someone else, maybe finding videos of either AAC users or people online who are supporting others. I know AssistiveWare has a whole host of really nice, short, clear videos. So just, through those blogs and those websites that you're accessing already, finding videos and watching those, and then getting into like, let's use the device that we have.
What about this idea of AAC being distracting in the classroom, or that they're playing with the device?
Yeah, I actually have an idea and a question. In some classrooms, I've seen where they're doing an activity and the AAC device is maybe back where they were sitting. And so a child will want to communicate something and will go back to the AAC device where it is, which I find a fabulous skill. But the teacher will say, no, 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 you need to stay with the class. You need to be a part of the activity, and feels that using the device is not doing what the class is doing. And I'd be interested in some advice on how to kind of talk about if the device can't be near the activity, maybe it's movement, maybe it's center of the room. How can we allow the child to communicate and participate? So I'd really appreciate advice on that, because that is kind of the root of that distraction. It's not part of the activity.
Great question.
Is
can
it a
kick us off.
student that can't move their device themselves? Like, could it be something you work on the student with, is to take their device with them when they go to a new activity?
This would be something where they were sitting and watching a video and the teacher says, all right, everybody stand up, we're going to do the dance. And the AAC device stays maybe where the chair is. So the student could hold the device, but then also couldn't participate in the movement activity. So my viewpoint on this instance that I'm referring to that's been more of a problem is the device can stay, 3 feet behind them. It's accessible. They know where it is. They go to it when they want to communicate, but they stop the movement activity to go communicate. And that's the difficulty the teacher's having. The teacher is also having difficulty, well, I can't hold it. I can't make it accessible. I'm helping other students. And that's kind of the barrier I'm dealing with right now of, well, I think we should allow him to communicate and redirect him back to the activity, but the teacher disagrees.
Marissa said she joined a student during story time. They're using the device more like exploring it. And the teacher was looking at her like, are you going to stop that? And she says that humbly reminded me that I haven't spoken with teacher about providing space for the student to explore, like as any other student may speak out during story time.
Yeah, I like the connection of that between that and Leah's question, because it makes me think that there is a training component that needs to go there of training the teacher that this device is the student's voice, and that it is a language. You can think of it as, as if it were Spanish or sign language or something, but it's a picture language, a symbol language that you're not used to, but it is a language. And so just really having that conversation, a hard conversation, explaining the importance of this, and whoever, depending on who the teacher is, you may need some research to back you up or someone else to be in your corner, but it sounds like a little bit of a training component there.
And so I also think about like, what is the teacher, what is the goal of the activities that we're doing, right? So the teacher's goal and your goal, or the student's goal, and kind of going back to that and aligning, like, I know your goal is this movement activity. And like Sarah said, any other student would be able to talk during it or whatever, or might talk and be told this is not the time to talk or whatever it is. But just kind of like realigning your goals together, that you're both in this for the same reason, however, I'm not explaining that well.
I like that, though. I think what you're emphasizing that I didn't emphasize and should have is it still can be a relationship. You're still partners with that teacher, right? You don't want to develop any sort of like friction or a bad relationship or tell them what to do like that. You have to try and come at this learning opportunity, in a collaborative sort of way, or else they're going to get even more defensive and be like, well, you just don't understand because you're not a teacher. You don't get it, so trying to relate to them in whatever way you can.
Does anyone write IEP goals with a teacher, or do you work with teams who SLP and OT and teacher are writing goals together? I know that can be challenging, but I've seen some of the best carryover happen when that happens, because then the teacher is also saying, yeah, that's part of my goal because we wrote that together. We all want communication in this situation. Or SLP is working on literacy and the teacher knows that's happening with the SLP, so they're not questioning why you're coming in here and distracting the class, because you all have similar goals.
That is happening in the district that I support. And to your point, it can be challenging to find the time and also to align. For example, I've heard SLPs who want to come at literacy with a comprehensive approach, using some of the maybe newer research that we have, whereas teachers might be, the teacher she supports might be coming at it from a like sight word memorization type of goal. So it takes some collaboration there, but if you can do it, then it really does increase that buy-in and ownership over the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Can I share something about how I've structured some PD? We are fortunate enough to have district PD days throughout the year. And I've actually offered sessions showing the movie This Is Not About Me. And the sessions are like an hour, 15 minutes long. The movie is like 54 minutes. And it was super powerful. We just had conference week, and so the paraprofessionals have professional development during that time. And I actually pulled a bunch of quotes from the movie and then did a think, right? So people after the movie had to think for 2 or 3 minutes, so they wrote stuff down, and then stand up, hand up, pair up with someone who wasn't in their row. It was so powerful. I did some stuff saying like, there's lots of things that I have learned from this movie because I watched it 10 times now. And for me, I was vulnerable and said, there's lots of things that I have done, can't say wrong, but where I didn't know better, and now I know better, and I'm changing my vocabulary, right? From nonverbal to non-speaking, right? And just, I think sharing my own process of change made people more willing to, when they got to the part where they're sharing with their peers, it was really powerful. And people just said, oh yeah, that was like one of the best PDs. And I was just like, man, if it'd only be so easy, you could just show a movie that's really well crafted for an hour and then just listen to people talk. So coming from a base, we've gotten lots of kind of requests for coaching and just follow-ups, right? So very useful.
I just have to say how much I love that movie too. I also shared it as a PD in my district and got really great response from many people. Although I did have some teachers from our self-contained program who had a defensive, I would say, reaction to it. So what I love that you shared in your story is that you shared your own truth and you were vulnerable in saying like, this is what I used to do. And now that I know better, I'm doing better. And I think that part is so important.
As Linda mentioned, PD days. What are you all doing for time, or how can we help each other find time? One thing that I'll just say, when I worked in the Everett School District, we had, there was like a summer tech training. And when we talked to the tech person about how AAC is technology, and even we could do low tech training. So we could train about core boards because it was a technology. Then it was funded by that department, and we did summer training that way. And then we got a lot of general educators and paraeducators to join. But I know it's hard to find time. So what is working, or what have you tried?
I was wondering if anybody has done any asynchronous content as more of a overview. Like, I know thinking about all the different learners that getting maybe some snippets from the movie, actually maybe watching the trailer of that movie, This Is About Me. In other content areas, I've had good luck with just doing some kind of baseline stuff and then doing follow-up. I think the idea is like having lots of different modalities to get training is really important.
School district in a big city, it was either Boston or someplace where they were implementing a coaching model, and they started with asynchronous training as the like foundation, which I think you kind of spoke to also. So like, in order to be coached on AAC, and you all want to, you have students who are using it, here's some modules that you can watch first and get that foundation training in an asynchronous way, and then we'll launch into the coaching.
Piece for the asynchronous is there's a lot of people who feel they don't want to show that they don't know. And so getting that information before they go, because in many districts, there's like someone who's a totally hotshot, knows everything. And doing the learning privately for some people first is really a way of like respecting kind of like how their learning process and journey. And also maybe that they, you know, have to go slower, they have to watch it a couple of times.
Yeah, that's making me think too, like there's so many like AAC 101 types of places you can go for content out there. So if you could grab like a podcast, a video, maybe you record yourself doing a training, whatever it is, maybe having a few options. Again, going back to that idea of universal design, offering adults to self-select their best mode for learning. The other thing I was going to say about time, especially if you're looking to train paras, in our district, I'm not sure if this is the case around the state, but in our district, our paras have a certain amount of time, like 30 minutes a week or something. It's minimal, but there's something that's built into their calendar that teachers use often to calibrate with their team and to talk about whatever the hot topic is. And so what I've done is ask the teacher, hey, I need like 2 30-minute sessions to talk about AAC 101 and modeling or whatever it is. You know, are there 2 times that you're already meeting when I can just pop in, bring some devices, and we'll get some hands-on training? And so sometimes that works well too, to just talk to the staff and find out like what training is already in place. And maybe it's like a building-wide training that you get 10 minutes of every time to talk about an AAC tip of the month or whatever it is, but finding something that's already existing and just adding your part into it.
Here is that presentation that Sarah showed. Let's see, our next meeting is December 12th. Funding sources for AAC. I know this is a hot topic. So bring what you know, and we will also have resources for you. And we hope to see you then.